I'd love to turn it now to Swami Atmajnanananda. Swamiji, thank you so much. And the platform is yours.
So thank you, Swamiji. This is a very nice opportunity for me. Already I've seen 3 people that I haven't seen in years, old friends. So it's a very nice occasion. I can only see a few of you, so it feels very intimate. I know that there are a lot more people, but anyhow, thank you for the nice introduction. A little bit too flowery, but it's okay. I appreciate it anyhow.
It is Bhakti Yoga, the path of love.
Okay. Now, Bhakti Yoga, the path of devotion. And the path of devotion, we hear over and over again that this is an easy path, at least comparatively, an easy path. Sri Ramakrishna, when we read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, we find that he will also say this. He uses the term shohodpad. It means easy, simple, and natural. But every once in a while, he'll add a little footnote. He'll say, Tobe ato shohod noi, but it's not that easy. So we shouldn't think that this doesn't require a tremendous effort and sincerity and everything else. And in this regard, I want to start out by relating a very nice incident that took place in the life of Swami Premananda, one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. Not just one of the direct disciples. He played a very unique role in our order. He was the only one that Sri Ramakrishna felt was pure enough who could be by his side when he went into samadhi to hold him. His body was so sensitive, especially at that time. So he was a very pure and loving soul. He was the essence of devotion. Now, the Swami Premananda was one of the last of the direct disciples to really accept Swamiji's ideal about social service being the highest form of worship. He stuck more to this idea that Thakur told us to do spiritual practice, not to get too involved in the world, all of that. But what happened was, towards the end of his life, this must be, I don't know, 19, 17, 18, something like that. He had a very bad illness, and people thought that he would actually die from that illness. Now, this is a little side note. He told everybody it's impossible that I'll die. My mother is still alive. And this goes back to a promise that Thakur made to Swami Premananda's mother. He was Baburam at that time because she was a great devotee of his. Thakur went to her and said, I want to ask something of you. She said, what? I want your son. I need a pure-souled boy to live with me and to be a monk also. So she said, okay, but does a mother ever give away a son without asking for a boon in return? So he said, okay, what is it? And she said, promise me that I'll never live to see the death of any of my children. So even though everyone thought that Swami Premananda was about to pass away, he said, no, my mother is still living. So it's impossible. And it was true. He recovered, and it was only after his mother passed away that he did. Not too many years after that. The reason I mention this is that during this illness, he was bedridden for a long time. And he decided at that time that he would read all of the complete works of Swami Vivekananda. I don't think he knew English, probably whatever was translated into Bengali. He read all of them, and he said his mind underwent a complete transformation. That now he saw that this idea that the worship of God dwelling in the poor and Daridra Narayana, he said that this is such a wonderful new path for this age that wherever he spoke only about that. Now, there was an occasion after he got better, he was invited to speak at our center in Malda. And I happened to go to the center some years ago, and I saw the place where he stayed and where he spoke and everything. And he started speaking about this ideal of worship of God through service. And someone in the audience said, Swamiji, talk to us about divine love, about prema. And he looked around and he said, but who is there ready to receive it? And then he said, let me tell you a story. There was once Fediwala. Fediwala is somebody who would walk down the street, a peddler. Someone, a hawker, only would go down the street and yell out something, everyone knew he was there. Everyone would peek out their windows and doors and see what is he selling, and they'll come out. If they want it, they'll buy it. So he said there was a Fediwala walking down the street, and everyone saw that he was there, but they couldn't see what he was selling. So they all went out to the street, and they all asked him, "What are you selling?" And he said, "I'm selling prema, divine love." And they were all so excited. They said, "Yes, we all want it." And they all lined up and everything. And then one of them said, "But what is the price? What do we have to pay for this?" And he looked at them and he said, "The price is your head." And they all ran inside. Not a single one was there to pay the price. Now, what does that mean? That if we really want this divine love, we have to sacrifice our all. Everything that we are, everything that we possess is complete, what's called Atma Samarpana, complete offering of the self, the Sharanagati. This is not to frighten anybody off, but just so that we really understand that we shouldn't overestimate the ease of the path of Bhakti Yoga. Of course, relative to Jnana Yoga and Raja Yoga, it has certain advantages, and we'll talk about that. But it also requires tremendous sincerity and maybe long hours of spiritual practice. The same rules of yama niyama that we see of moral and ethical life, these also have to be followed very faithfully. Self-controlled faith, forbearance, all of the things associated with Raja Yoga and Jnana Yoga. We'll find that we can't skip these here either. That these different paths are not so different as they seem at first. Now, saying all of that, there are some advantages, and I want to talk about some of the advantages to the path of devotion, and the reason why it's often prescribed. And we know that Ramakrishna, he used to say, especially in this Kali Yuga, in this present age, that this path of devotion, and he used to say, Naradiya Bhakti, the path of devotion that's taught by Narada, is the most helpful path for most people, the most appropriate path for most people. So it was prescribed for most. Sri Ramakrishna would rarely prescribe the path of Jnana Yoga, although he gave all the principles of Jnana Yoga. It's not that he withheld anything, but he wanted them to keep that tied in the corner of their cloth and to practice Bhakti Yoga, a more devotional type of practice, not in contradiction to the highest teachings of Jnana Yoga, but as a more practical way of approaching it. So he used to talk about this in Narada, the path of devotion as taught by Narada. And I'll get to this a little bit at the very end, because we can take this in a very general sense, that he's teaching the path of devotion. We can also see, when we look at the Narada Bhakti Sutras, that many of the special teachings of Sri Ramakrishna are in perfect accord with some of these sutras that we'll read in the Bhakti Sutras. So why in this particular age? Sri Ramakrishna used to say that this Kali Yuga, that life is short. He used to say that we have an inordinate degree of body consciousness. He used to say this Kali Yuga is associated with his annagata prana, that the whole life is given over to food and to health and physical things. So we're not really suited, as a general rule. Of course, there are exceptions. As a general rule, we're not really suited to spend long hours in meditation and solitude. Thakur used to say, as the rishis did in the ancient days. Early morning, they would leave the ashram, spend the whole day in meditation, come back late at night. There aren't too many people who are capable of doing that. We'll also get to chapter 12 in Bhagavad Gita later. These are actually the texts that I want to look at. But there we also see this is on the path of devotion, because in some sense it is easier. There we find this word klesha, that the path of Jnana Yoga involves a little bit more of it's more troublesome, more difficult. So there is something to this idea that it's a smoother, easier type of path. And there are reasons for that. One is the prerequisites. We've seen that we need prerequisites like sincerity and faith and good character and conduct and everything. But we don't have to be very well versed in the scriptures. We don't have to have a burning renunciation. We can live in the householder setting. None of these things are necessary. The only prerequisite is really sincerity. Sincerity, a sincere longing to develop love of God, to have some type of realization, to lead a selfless type of life. This is enough to begin the journey. This is a big distinction between Jnana Yoga. Jnana Yoga, we have to start at the end. We start with this idea that, yes, I am he. I am not the body, I am not the mind. In the path of Bhakti Yoga, we can start as dualists. It's okay. And through this cord of love, Swamiji uses this illustration as if there's a cord that's tying us between the devotee and God. And by pulling this, coming closer and closer, that distance will become less and less. And we can realize oneness even through this path of devotion also. So we can start out with our ordinary understanding of who and what we are. I have my body consciousness. I have my attachment to my personality and ego. I know that it has to be transformed. I know that it has to be purified and everything, but I don't have to, at the very beginning, say, no, I'm not this, not this, not this. I don't have to go through all of that. So we can start out with our present understanding of the nature of the world, the nature of God, and the nature of the individual. These are the three things that are always key in Indian philosophy. Jiva and Jagat and Brahman or Ishvara. So we can start out, this world is real, I take it as real, that's okay. I don't have to be a big philosopher and say, oh, it's like a dream or anything like that. I can accept that it's real. I can accept the fact that, yes, I'm an embodied being. I have my desires, my wants, I have my good points, I have my bad points, but I understand that all of this is my present understanding and that this can all change. Through the path of devotion, I accept everything preliminarily. I accept everything because that's the rung of the ladder that I'm on. And I can keep going higher and higher and higher. I don't have to start by jumping to the roof. We can do this in a very gradual, easy way. It's another reason why this path is easier. Path of Jnana Yoga, they say, is like climbing a mountain just on the steep side of the hill, just going straight up. Is it faster? Maybe for some. Is it shorter? Yes. But the path of Bhakti Yoga, going around with just a gradual rise in the elevation, it's much longer, but it may be faster. We may not even make it on the other one. So these are some of the advantages, and it depends on the individual. Of course, we'll see that also. So we start out, Swamiji says, all as dualists on the path of love. And through this cord of love, we come closer and closer until we reach that union, with the beloved. So this will be going from dualism to a kind of qualified non-dualism. Then we lose ourselves completely, and we reach that state of oneness. So for Sri Ramakrishna, the path of devotion led to oneness. Every path, he said, culminated in oneness. So the devotee may not like to stay in that state of oneness, may prefer to think of it as union. These are all different optional things, personality types of things, but the actual truth is that spiritual practice is meant to efface the ego. And when the ego gets merged in this path of love, we become self-forgetful, and there's nothing left but oneness. There are other great advantages to this path of devotion. Many of the things that we're told we have to renounce, that belong to Maya, that are obstacles for us, not only aren't renounced on the path of devotion, but they become our best aids and helpers on the spiritual path. And two things in particular. One is called Nama, and the other Rupa, name and form. In the path of Jnana Yoga, name and form are these superimpositions due to Maya, which do not allow us to see the real nature of things, which is Brahman. So we try to eliminate the name and the form to see the underlying reality. And it's very difficult because we live in a world of name and form. Now, in Bhakti Yoga, we don't have to do that, but we find that the name of God and the form of God become the two things that we hold on to in order to fix the mind on God. Somebody says, think of God. We say, how do I do that? What do I think of? We say, well, you can give a name to God and you can give a form to God. Now, is it absolute? It's not absolute. It may be subjective. We may be choosing it on our own. Does that mean it's false? No, it's not false. This is a very interesting thing about this because we're getting the essence of it. I'll give one example. This is an example that we find in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna of the pond and people who come to the pond to take water from that pond. He uses this mostly in the context of the harmony of religions, but he also in this other context. If we want to access that water, we have to have a container. Now, the nature of water is formless, colorless, nameless, everything. But as soon as we dip the bucket in or the pitcher in and take the water, it takes a form. There's no other way to access it without giving it a form. And we can give whatever name we want to it. So Sri Ramakrishna says some will call it jal, some will call it pani, some will call it water. But the substance is the same. So these secondary things don't remove the essential truth of what we're getting. If somebody says, oh, you're worshiping God as mother, God can't be female or male or anything. This is just your imagination. That part may be subjective, but what we get is real. We're getting the reality of it. So this name and form, these are two things that manifest in terms of the mantra and the Ishta Devata, or chosen ideal, and the divine name that we repeat. These are the two main things that give some tangible form to the infinite absolute reality that we're trying to realize. And if we want to establish a relationship and have that feeling of love, then we have to have a little personality there. We have to have something to cling to. We want to call on God. Somebody says God is nameless. How to call on the nameless? And they say, okay, then use any name you want. God will come. The name is secondary. Somebody will use one name, someone another name. It doesn't matter. But this is for our sake. So what we'll find in this path of Bhakti Yoga is that there's a psychology to it that's brilliant. The philosophy of Advaita Vedanta is equally brilliant. But this psychology that we find in Bhakti Yoga is so subtle and so helpful for us. And when we see it in the terms that the explanation that Sri Ramakrishna gives, we see how very important and how expansive it is, how it allows us to have spiritual practice that includes all sorts of different spiritual attitudes. So it's a very, very helpful type of thing. So we may say, okay, name and form, this belongs to Maya. We get a very important distinction from Sri Ramakrishna. Yes, it belongs to Maya, but he says there's a type of Maya which is called Avidya Maya, which binds us to the world, and another type of Vidya Maya, which will release us from that bondage. He gives several examples. One, there's a type of green leafy vegetable, which they call hinche shak. And normally, if we eat spinach and other green vegetables, it increases bile in the system. He says this particular green doesn't increase bile. In fact, it does the opposite. It eliminates it. So this type of Vidya Maya, not only doesn't it increase our bondage, it removes it. So he says it's just like desires. The desires keep us in bondage. The desire for God is not considered that same type of desire. That it doesn't bind us, but in addition, it removes the other desires. So this is that idea of Vidya Maya. And it's like, we get a thorn in our foot, we take another thorn and we use that to pull it out. Who is going to say, why should I use another thorn? That's also something that sticks in the, but because it's helpful. This is the psychology of it.
Swami,
Okay, yes.
Some of our listeners need a little bit increase in volume. Can you either just increase your volume or just come closer to the computer just a little bit? Just speak a little bit louder. That's all. Just speak a little bit louder if you can.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is there a way to increase the volume?
No, you just have to speak a little bit louder.
Okay. Okay. I haven't said anything so important yet. So if you didn't hear it, it's okay. Okay, now, another important point is human emotions. In most of, at least what we understand as Vedantic sadhana, the path of Jnana Yoga, Raja Yoga, we try to not stifle exactly, but keep a lid on our human emotions. The path of devotion, we get to utilize them. So it's another case where rather than eliminate something, we give something a new direction. We take something which ordinarily will be an obstacle for us, and we turn that into something of an advantage for us, something very helpful for us. Thakur uses the expression "mor firie dao," twisted in the opposite direction. That let your anger be anger at not having realized God. Your lust be for feeling union with God. We'll get to this a little bit later when we get to this Narada Bhakti Sutra. Now, I'll give one other example of something which is considered no-no in the path of knowledge, but which is extremely helpful in the path of devotion. This is a concept which is called adhyasa. We have two terms in Jnana Yoga, adhyasa and upadhi. Can you hear better? Is it okay? Better, okay. Adhyasa, superimposition. Upadhi means a certain quality or characteristic in Vedanta, which doesn't really belong to something but gets superimposed on it. So the pure self, we superimpose this idea of body, mind, senses, ego, personality, and we identify with that. So what we're trying to do in Jnana Yoga is we're trying to de-superimpose. We're trying to rid ourselves of all of these things. So this is that path of neti neti. I'm not the body, not the mind, not the senses. It works a little bit, but very hard to get rid of this sense of I, this ego sense. Ramakrishna says that it's like a pond covered with scum. We can remove the scum and we see that pure water underneath. But the second we stop with our hand, it gets covered over again. So what do we do in Bhakti Yoga? We take this idea of superimposition and we superimpose on our personality a second personality. And the second personality will be something that conforms to another concept, which is called bhava, relationship. Sri Ramakrishna uses this term, aropa, aropara. He says we have to take a spiritual attitude. And it's the same thing that if I can't get rid of this identification of the ego with the body, let me identify the ego with something else, which will remove this identification with the body, just as the Hinche Shak will remove the bile. So if I think of myself as a child of the Divine Mother, automatically I'm thinking of myself in terms of my spirit self. Biologically, I'm the child of my biological parents. If I'm a child of the Divine Mother, that I is no longer this physical body I. So we're adopting a new type of identity, which will have the power to stifle the old and to eventually eliminate that old type of identity. So Sri Ramakrishna gives great emphasis to this. He uses the expression Akta bhav arop korte hobe. You have to assume a particular attitude. And then he says, Ashroy korte hobe. You have to take refuge in this. This becomes the essential element that we cling to in our spiritual life following the path of devotion. And we can do this in many different ways that we can identify with all the different paradigms that we find as worshipers in all of the different devotional schools. So this is quite different again from this path of Jnana Yoga, where we try to get rid of all relations. Now this is another great point, that we are born as children. That there's not one of us, of course some exceptions may be there, but for most of us that don't know what it is to have parents, or maybe a brother and a sister, that have human relations. The jnani will try to downplay these things. And in the tradition, the old traditional India, the path of Jnana Yoga was meant mostly for the sannyasins. And the sannyasins were very strict in those days, where they would really renounce family. After 12 years, they could go back and visit the family. Otherwise, they wouldn't see them. So who was mother to a sannyasin? Who was mother? I am the self. Who was father? Who was mother? Who was brother, sister to that? I am the self. That was their attitude. Very strict and austere. Now, in the tradition with this idea of the bhavas, and we really have to give credit to the Vaishnava tradition especially. We'll see other traditions also in developing this idea that we can take all of these family relationships and we can utilize them in developing love for God. Suppose somebody says, our highest ideal is to love God. And they say, how do I do it? I don't know who God is, what God is. How do I develop this love for God? And somebody says, you know what it means to love a mother? Yes. You know, if you're a mother, what it means to love the child? Yes. Then take that same love and think of God as your mother, think of God as your child, think of God as your beloved, and that love which you know through the human relationship, you use that love and direct it towards the divine. So it's very brilliant type of psychology behind all of this. Now, in the Vaishnava tradition, we find that there are 5 specific bhavas. And the first one is called Shanta Bhava, peaceful attitude. It's not much spoken about. It doesn't involve any of these family relationships. It's considered the lowest. The ancient rishis had that. Then we have Dasya Bhava, the attitude of the servant. It's not a family relationship, but still, we know what it's like for someone to serve someone with great love and devotion. This isn't an ordinary type of servant. And we'll see the paradigm will be Hanuman, worshiping Rama. So this is the next highest. We'll see that there's a hierarchy, because as we go higher, the higher one will include the lower ones also. So the servant, he doesn't care about his own needs, only happy to serve, to take a bullet for the president. Doesn't care about even his own life. So there's perfect selflessness. So adopting that type of attitude is very helpful in getting rid of any selfish ego that we have. The only sense of ego is with regard to the master. What is the ego that the servant has? Yes, I am the servant. Swami Vivekananda wrote a beautiful poem in Sanskrit that says, we can crush the stars to atoms. We can unhinge the universe. Don't you know who we are? We are the servants of Sri Ramakrishna. So that type of ego, somebody say, what a big, strong ego. Yes, it's a wonderful ego, the servant ego, tremendous. And it squashes out that other selfish ego. This is the greatness of it. Then we get to Sakhya Bhava, the relationship between two friends. What's happening now is the grandeur of God. God is coming down lower and lower and lower to our own level. Now we're equals. We're friends. We said the cowherd boys with Sri Krishna, Govinda and his friends, they would sit, eat off of the same plate, jump on each other's backs. They would have a good time together. Worship God that way. It's a tremendous idea. Then Vatsalya Bhava. Here we look upon God as a child, helpless child. That the child can't do anything. We have to look after the child, think of the child, do everything for the child. Whole mind is on the child, whole day and night. And that love of the mother for the child is a selfless love. It doesn't ask for anything in return. The child can't do anything. Child can't even say, I love you, mommy. Little baby, infant. But the mother does it just out of love. So this is that example of selfless love, not requiring anything in return. Ahetaki bhakti. Then the highest is considered madhurya or madhur bhava. This is the love between the lover and the beloved. And there are 2 types. One, husband and wife. This is a very high type. But the higher one is the lover and the beloved, when this is even outside of the marriage. This was the case, of course, with Radha and Krishna. That they were all the gopis, they were married. But they loved to go out, and of course they were young, and go out, and they couldn't wait to be in the presence of Sri Krishna. And Radha was unique among all of the gopis because she only cared for the happiness of Krishna. All of the others They wanted to be happy with Krishna, or they wanted to be happy and see him happy. She didn't care about her own happiness. She only cared for this making for the happiness of Sri Krishna. Now, outside of these, of course, we have other attitudes, looking upon God as mother and father. Sri Ramakrishna's main attitude was what he called Shantan Bhav, the attitude of the child to the mother. And there are tremendous advantages to this, that the small child knows nothing but the mother. The child relies wholly on the mother. The child is happy whatever the mother does for it. We have the example of the kitten. Wherever the mother cat puts the kitten, that kitten is content. So this contentment comes from that type of attitude. The Sharanagati. This is one of the great concepts that we have. This taking refuge. Whether the mother cat puts the kitten in the fireplace or puts the kitten on the master's bed, doesn't matter. My mother put me there, I'm happy. So these are all the different attitudes. Now, the very interesting thing about this whole idea of these 5 different attitudes is that more emphasis is put on the worshiper than on the object of worship. In other words, if one wants to worship Rama according to this Dasya Bhava, then whole mind gets fixed on Hanuman, because we don't know how to do it. How do we superimpose the concept, the idea, the feeling, the personality of the devotee, of the servant, when we don't have that in our DNA? We fix the mind on Hanuman, and we identify with Hanuman. And Sri Ramakrishna did this in such a literal way. He would tie his claws so that the back of it hung down like a tail. He would jump from place to place. He would climb trees. He would eat bananas, everything, so that he virtually became Hanuman in order to have the vision of Rama. And he did this with all of the different bhavas. The Madhur Bhava, he had to feel that he was Radha herself in order to have the vision of Krishna. Now, how do we know what attitude is best for us? Ramakrishna tells us, he gives us 2 very important ideas. One is that we all have a different personality. We all have a different taste. Different things appeal to us. This idea of worshiping God as the beloved, it may be too romantic for us. We may be heroic types. So he says, ruchi bheda, that it's a question of taste. And then second thing is, okay, it tastes good, but can I digest it? Hajam Shakti. He says that we have to be able to digest it. We may think that, yes, I love this idea, soham, I am he, but we really don't have that that sharp intellect, and we have too much attachment and body consciousness and everything, so it's not appropriate for us. So he gives that example of the mother who cooks fish in 5 different ways because her children, they like it in different ways, but they also, some can't digest the very spicy types of fish, so she uses different types. Okay, I can see that I'm not even close. I'm about 1/10 of the way through. Okay, let me mention a few other things before we go a little bit to this Gita and the Bhakti Sutras. Sri Ramakrishna, when he talks about Bhakti Yoga as a path, we find that he's really talking about 2 separate paths or 2 separate levels and tiers. And the first is what he calls Vaidhi Bhakti. Vaidhi Bhakti means according to Vidhi. Vidhi is a prescription. When we take initiation or read the text, we find that we should do a particular type of spiritual practice. We receive mantra, we have to repeat it a certain number of times. We try to be very regular. When we go to the shrine, when we meditate, how long we sit. We may observe different types of disciplines. We may do the puja and some formal worship, ritual worship, all of these things. These are indispensable at the beginning of spiritual life, but these are also preliminary, and these lead to a stage which he calls anuraga, or sometimes he uses the term raganuga bhakti, and this is a spontaneous, full-blown love of God, where there's no need to have any specific time or place or repeat the name a certain number of times, anything like that. And once we reach that, we're very, very close to that God realization. He compares this to the rising of the sun. The whole night we're in darkness. When will we see the sun? When will we see the sun? Then we reach that point where we see, there's a glow in the horizon. That glow is we're reaching that state of anuraga, that intense love and that intense yearning for God. And we know as soon as we see it, he says that soon the sun will be up and we'll have that realization. Now, how do we know and how do we go about reaching that stage? We stick our nose to the grindstone and we stick with the Vaidhi Bhakti. And it's going to happen when it's going to happen, and we don't decide, it simply happens. If we think that we've reached that stage and we stop doing our spiritual practice, we'll simply slide back. So Sri Ramakrishna gives several nice examples. He says, if we have a sore and it forms a scab, that if we try to pull that scab off before the wound is healed underneath, it'll bleed again and form another scab. So he says, simply wait. When it's completely healed underneath, the scab will fall off of its own. We won't have to do anything. He gives another example that the daughter-in-law, when she's expecting a child, month by month, the mother-in-law lessens her duties until the final month, she has nothing to do. We just wait for the birth of the child, and after that, just enjoy the child. So this second tier is something which will just happen, and we have to do our spiritual practices very regularly. It may seem that they're antithetical to each other, that we're trying to reach the stage of spontaneity, and we're trying to do it by boring ritual and routine. But this is the only way to do it. There's another nice illustration. Thakur talks about the bird that falls asleep on the mast of the ship. The ship goes out to sea, and the bird wakes up and doesn't see where the land is, so flies in every direction and doesn't find land, and ultimately says, okay, let me simply take refuge with the boat. Wherever the boat will take me, then I'll be happy to go there. This is a sharanagati. It comes. Now we can say that what a waste of time flying in every direction. Why didn't the bird just say that in the first place? Because unless the bird had tried to find land on its own, it wouldn't be able to reach that state. So the Vaidhi Bhakti period is indispensable unless we're born with some really very good types of samskaras. Okay, now I want to go to chapter 12 in the Bhagavad Gita. This is the chapter specifically on Bhakti Yoga. The Gita is a little bit like Swamiji was. Swami Vivekananda, whenever he talked about one subject, it was if that was the only thing that existed. So even in Gita, some chapters, if it's specifically about Bhakti Yoga, then that becomes the best. If it's about Jnana Yoga, that becomes the best. Sometimes Sri Krishna will say, yeah, there are different paths for different people. This Bhakti Yoga, he'll really emphasize this idea of Bhakti. We can break this down, this chapter, and I won't be able to go through it very thoroughly. I advise everyone to read it. It's a beautiful chapter. Into three separate sections. The first is explaining why this Bhakti Yoga is an easier path for most people, because Arjuna asked the question that, all right, you've already told me about the glories of the infinite absolute Brahman, but you're also telling me about the worship of the personal God, which is better. So Sri Krishna will say, they're both good. You'll reach the final goal either way. But the path of devotion is a little bit easier. I think that it's a little bit better in some respect. Main reason, he says, is that, and we get a term, dehavat, that most of us either, of course, we're all embodied beings, but most of us have this body consciousness and identification with the body, which becomes the obstacle that way.
Swami?
Yes?
Is it there are a few people who still can't hear. Is Swami Chidbrahmananda there? Can he increase your microphone volume a bit? If he's not there, that's fine.
No, he's not, but
okay. All right, that's fine. Then just speak up as yeah, bring it close as you can. Yes, okay, let's try that.
Is this better?
I think so. Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, okay. Let me, okay. Okay. Now, the second section, and this is just, I mean, we can see that this chapter 12 of the Gita, it, it, uh, it's not listed section 1, 2, and 3, but we can see that there are three different main topics there. And the second portion is very interesting because here we find out what are the qualifications and how do we go about doing it? What is it really all about? We've kind of skirted this issue. How do we really, what are we trying to do? How do we practice this path of devotion? So we will get some very specific advice here. And we'll find that it will include Raja Yoga and Karma Yoga and everything else. So he says, dedicate every action to me. When Sri Krishna says to me, he means to God, personal God, however we understand it. He says, meditate on me with perfect concentration. Ananya Yoga. That means don't think of anything else. Exclusively meditate on me. So to fix the mind on me that way. And then a beautiful expression, Matpara. Look upon me as the supreme. Have no higher goal in life than me. So this path of devotion will include this karma yoga, dedicating every action to God. Raja yoga, meditate on me. Jnana yoga, regard me as the highest goal. To discriminate between what is real and what is unreal, what is important, what is not important. Now, we get an interesting section because we'll get different pieces of advice. And after each one, Sri Krishna will say, okay, maybe that's too tough. Let me give you something else to do. He's anticipating Arjuna saying, no, that's too hard, without Arjuna having to say it. So first he says, fix your mind on me, place your intellect in me, and you shall live in me. There is no doubt. Now, there's a very beautiful idea that where do we live? I often think about this. If we're body-bound creatures, we live wherever the body is. If we think of ourselves more in terms of the subtle body, wherever the mind is, that's where we live. If the mind is constantly at Sri Ramakrishna's feet, at Dakshineswar, then that's where we live. And we have wonderful examples of this. M, the recorder of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, may be the best example. His whole life after meeting him, mind was always at Dakshineswar or Kashipur, at the feet of Sri Ramakrishna. So if you fix your mind in me and place your intellect in me, that's where you'll live from here on, forever. So this is the first piece of advice. Then he says that if you can't do that, because the mind wanders, we know that. The mind will wander and we'll try to bring it back, but this is the nature of the mind. And we shouldn't feel bad about it. So Sri Krishna knows that. So he says, if we can't fix the mind on God, then what does he say? Abhyasa yoga. Then practice. Let it wander away. We sit for meditation, let it wander away, but bring it back. Keep trying. Don't give up. This is primarily a meditative retreat technique, that the mind wanders and we try to again fix it, and it wanders again, fix it. And the goal is that mind will stay focused on the chosen ideal for a longer period of time. When it wanders away, we'll catch it faster and we'll bring it back faster. Otherwise, the goal shouldn't be that the mind will easily dwell 100%. That is too much. Abhyasa yoga is gradually, shanai shanai, gradually we bring the mind back that way. Now, what if we can't do that? Even that, then he says, perform action for my sake. Feel that every action is done as an offering to God. Have no selfish motive for anything. Even that will bring perfection. Now, when we're acting, we get caught up in the action. We sometimes we're concentrating so much we forget. So Sri Krishna says, okay, suppose you can't do that, then take refuge in me, Sharanagati, complete surrender to the will of God, and abandon all the fruits of action to me. Practicing self-control at the same time. You remember the story of Narada when he asked Narayana, who was your greatest devotee? And he said, oh, there's this farmer in the village, and you go and see him. And the farmer woke up every morning and he went to the shrine and he said, Lord, whatever I do today, I offer at your feet. If I forget you, forgive me. But everything is an offering to you. And then at the end of the day, he comes back and says, I was involved with my work. I forgot. But now whatever fruits of my labor, I offer at your feet. So Narada was not impressed. He said, I'm better than that. He says, so Sri Krishna said, okay, take this jar, this bottle filled with oil or milk, I don't remember, and walk around the world. Don't spill a drop. And he did it all around the world, came back, and he said, see, I didn't spill a drop. And then Sri Krishna said, how many times did you remember me? And he said, remember you? The whole mind was fixed on the bowl, so I wouldn't spill anything. Where was the time to remember you? And then he said, but see this farmer, at least he remembered me in the morning and in the evening. So we find a very interesting thing here, that this final verse in this section that will give a hierarchy. So it'll say that, okay, this abhyasa, it will be the lowest of this. Then after that, okay, knowledge is a little bit better, meditation is a little bit better, each one is a little better. But the last option turns out to be the best. Just like the last option of the bird flying, just staying on the ship, on the mast, that turned out to be the best, but we have to do the others first. So we find that the best option that we have is renouncing the fruits of action, taking refuge in God, and Sri Krishna says peace immediately follows from this. So this is that second section that we get through. The third section, and I really won't have time to go through it, but I want to just mention something very interesting here, that this third section is Sri Krishna telling Arjuna who he considers to be the best, highest class of devotee. And we find this is one of the teaching techniques that Sri Krishna uses. Whenever he wants to explain something, he'll give the example of the ideal person. So we have Sthita Prajna. We want to know what is it like to realize God. Well, let me give you the description of someone who has merged in this highest ideal, Sthita Prajna, the sage of steady wisdom. Then, what is it like to go beyond the three gunas? Okay, let me tell you what it's like. So what is it like to be a devotee? Let me give you an example. But the interesting thing is that all of the qualifications here will be things that we don't necessarily associate with the path of bhakti. But we may expect to say, oh, who is the greatest devotee? He who weeps for God, he who sits in front of the shrine all day long, who is singing my name in glories all day long, who dances in ecstasy. We don't find any of that. We'll find all of the same qualifications that we saw with the perfect jnani, the perfect karma yogi, with all of the things that the Sthita Prajna has. So just to go very quickly through this, we start out with relationships to other people. He hates no other creature, friendly and compassionate to all. He's unselfish, free from the feeling of I and mine. Then he'll have the qualities of a yogi, even-minded in pain and pleasure. What does that have to do with devotion? It has everything to do with devotion, only we don't associate it that way. So even-minded in pain and pleasure, forbearing, ever content. Then of concentrated mind, self-control, a firm conviction. Then we'll see this calmness of mind. The devotee is not someone who can always be up and jumping about and singing and dancing. Not agitated by the world. The world is not agitated by him. Independent, possessed of purity, efficient in work, dispassionate, unperturbed, renouncing every undertaking that is selfish in nature, doing the will of God. So it goes on and on like this. And what we learn from this is that what we think is pleasing to God may not be the highest thing that's pleasing to God. What's pleasing to God is that we lead a perfectly pure and selfless type of life. So the highest devotion is not necessarily sitting quietly in a temple or a shrine and singing and dancing and doing worship. Interacting with people, seeing God in others. There's a very beautiful line. I don't know where it's from, Swami Vivekananda quotes it. The mad bhaktanam cha ye bhaktas te me bhakta mata mata. This is those who were devotees of my devotees, I consider to be the best devotees. He doesn't say those who were devoted to me. This is Sri Krishna saying. Not those who were devoted to me. The highest ones are the ones who were devoted to my devotees. That means that service to other beings. And this is another type of bhakti yoga, we can say, that Swami Vivekananda emphasized so much. That what is the highest worship of God? Service to the indwelling presence, God dwelling within each and every human soul, living being, animals also, but within each and every being. That he said so many beautiful statements. May I be born again and again and worship the only God I believe in, the sum total of all human souls. And my God, the miserable, the terrible, whatever, this is the highest object of my worship. He said, I worship that God whom people in ignorance call man. So this what he called the living God. For him, this was the highest type of devotion. This is also a type of devotion, service to all living beings as worship of God, seeing God dwelling within all of them. Okay, now what I'll do, let me just mention one or two little things. I wanted to talk about the Narada Bhakti Sutras because there's some verses that we almost feel that Thakur must have read them because his teachings are so similar. This idea of Vyakulata, this is probably the most important teaching we have of Sri Ramakrishna's, that the real catalyst, the real underlying cause of any type of higher spiritual experience, any type of spiritual experience, is tremendous yearning and longing for God. And we find this Vyakulata, it's one of the most important verses where Narada gives his definition of bhakti. He said, when we feel that tremendous anguish at heart at not having realized God or forgetting God and everything, that this is highest definition of bhakti. And when we do everything as an offering to God. These are the two things. So we have this idea of Vyakulata, this idea that we use all of these emotions, these passions, and turn them towards God. This is also one of the sutras that we'll find. And there'll be so many other things that if anybody has any special questions about that, we can go to that also. But this idea of Vaidhi Bhakti also, we'll find there. One other idea that's stressed very much in the Bhakti Sutras, which Ramakrishna also stresses. Bhakti Yoga is a little different from the others. It's not that we're practicing the path of devotion for any reason other than we want to achieve devotion. They say every other path, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, we have some goal in mind, God realization, self-realization, something like that. But the path of Bhakti Yoga, we only want bhakti itself. So Thakur used to quote from a song, Sri Krishna says, I don't mind giving mukti. It's a very easy thing for me, but very rare for me to give devotion, something much higher. In some of the Vaishnava scriptures, they talk about this fifth Panchama Purushartha or Parama Purushartha. The highest goal of life is something above mukti. They don't care much for this liberation. The highest goal of life is love of God, is bhakti. Speak up more. Yeah? Okay. Okay. So I will stop here. And is it okay, Swami Harinamananda? I will stop here, and we can go to the question section.
Sure.
I'm trying to talk loud.
I understand, Marge. Yes, I think everybody who has a computer, make sure your volume is in the highest volume. All right, we want to make sure that is there. So if now we're going to go into the question and answer session. So there's two ways of doing this. If you go, you can type in a question below. You'll see a chat box. You can type in a question and it'll pop up my screen. Or another way of doing it is go click on participants. When you click on participants, you'll see on your right-hand side, it says raise hand. Click on the raise hand, and then Vikram will call on you. All right? So let's see. Let's go to our first question here. I'll start off with the one that was typed up here.
Okay.
The first question, Marge, is how should parents guide their kids, those specifically who have wandering minds? One of my kids is age 12 with excellent attention when he's focused to the task, but he's always diverting his attention towards multiple tasks. How can we guide such kids? And Marge, let me ask this also in a way. From a devotee standpoint, how do we also try to focus our minds when we find that our minds are always going in multiple directions? What do you prescribe as simple techniques maybe to help us focus our minds and increase when we're looking at the image of the divine, or how, just maybe you can include that in your question here.
Okay. The first one, I don't have a very good answer to that. The nature of the mind of young people is to wander. It's the nature of everybody's mind. If there's some scope for a shrine and to sit there together and at least have them sit quietly for some time, at least that much might be a little bit of a help. Now, the second question, I like this question because it's a very, very important question. And I'm very, very fond of a technique called Lila Dhyana. And I've spoken about this many times because I find it so helpful. And it's something that's emphasized by some of our Swamis, not all of them so much, but this is Lila Dhyana, is meditating on, we can say, the divine sport. And it's something that is used very much especially in some devotional traditions, Vaishnava tradition, Christian traditions, where the Christian meditation really, it will be take a parable of Christ and think about the teaching and everything. In this Lila Dhyana, what we're doing is we're giving the mind some area to run around in, because the mind wants to run around, but it's circumscribed. And they use the illustration of the cow that's tethered to a post. And we can make that rope as long as we want, but we know that there will be a circle that's circumscribed by the length of that rope. The rope will be like the radius, and there'll be a circle that's formed, and that the cow can roam anywhere within that, but can't go beyond it. So this is what we do with this Lila Dhyana, that suppose we're meditating on Sri Ramakrishna, and our instruction is, okay, you repeat his name and you try to picture his image. And we do it, and the image is very hazy, fades away, and we're not very good at that. And we're trying to keep the mind focused on that, and we're thinking about all sorts of the other things. The mind, we bring it back, and this Abhyasa Yoga, it works a little bit, but it's not all that effective for most people. That the mind still wanders. We find that. So this says, okay, let the mind wander within a certain area. So what do? We start putting a little context into our meditation. So we picture ourselves sitting in a certain place. So I feel that I'm sitting in Sri Ramakrishna's room. And if I open my eyes, I'll see him there, that I'm sitting there with him. Then, am I sitting alone? No. That Narendra is there, Rakal is there, Taruda is there, all the direct disciples are there. M will be there, and Balaram, some of the householder disciples, they're all there, watching, listening to Sri Ramakrishna, and he'll be sitting on his cot. I know what his cot looks like. I've been to his room. I know the pictures on the wall. I know all of these things. This type of meditation, just a little sidebar, that M, the recorder of the gospel, he recommended this very much. And he used to tell people, as soon as any devotee would come, he'd say, have you been to Dakshineshwar? And if they said no, he said, would go there. You go there, but don't go as a tourist. Go there, observe each and every place in the room. What took place, what incidents took place there. Walk around to the Panchavati, to the bell tree. Uh, Go to Thakur's room, see where he worshipped Holy Mother at Shodashi Puja, and etch these images in your mind. So when you sit for meditation, you can bring them back. And this is what he did. You know how he recorded the gospel? He just took these very fragmented notes, and he would read these notes. Then he would sit and go into meditation, and he would recreate the entire scene in his mind. So he would, again, he would be sitting there, and he would remember who was sitting next to him, uh, all the details, what time of day it was, what phase of the moon, everything he would remember. So we can do that, and this is making use of the imagination. Now, this is another case where the imagination is held to be something that is detrimental. It can be an obstacle. This is the reason why the mind wanders, because of our imagination. But the imagination, again, can be the antidote to the other type of imagination. Huh? So to keep the mind from wandering to outside things, we let the mind wander within this circle. So we can picture Sri Ramakrishna sitting there. He can be giving a certain teaching. He can get up, he can dance and sing. The devotees will be in a circle going around him. We can do all of these things. We find that that restless mind has been trapped inside this circle. It's allowed to wander, but we finish that meditation and say, I forgot the whole world. I forgot where I was. I was immersed in the thought of Sri Ramakrishna. This is called smarana manana, sharan mana. And Thakur emphasizes this very much. If we can't fix the mind like the real yogi, so it's unmoving, and the nirvasana and nirvritti, then let it wander about. Let it constantly think of all of these things. There's a nice story about this use of imagination that you'll find in this book, The Mind and Its Control, by Swami Atmajnanananda. There was a man who was walking down the street one day with a basket, and he happened to see a friend, and his friend said, where are you going and what's in your basket? And he said, I'm going to a party, and this party they'll be drinking, and you know that I have a drinking problem, that I drink too much and I start seeing snakes everywhere. So they said, oh, okay, and what's in your basket? And he said, there's a mongoose in my basket. And he said, a mongoose? He said, why? When I start seeing snakes, the mongoose will scare the snakes away. So the man said, what kind of a fool are you? How can a real mongoose scare away imaginary snakes? So then the man opened his basket and it was empty. And he said, you see, my mongoose is also an imaginary mongoose. So this imagination, this projection, this use of the imagination, this projection of these images and these incidents that took place in the life of Sri Ramakrishna or Holy Mother or Krishna or Rama, anything like that. This will be the snake that will drive away the imagination that's going towards all sorts of worldly things. So it's a very helpful way of making use of that. Swami Turiyananda used to say, today's imagination is tomorrow's realization. Yeah. So we're superimposing these ideas, but there's a reality behind it.
Swami, just one further, I love this technique. How do you suggest when we're do we incorporate this within our meditation time? So as you know, we're doing our japa. Do we integrate this into the this lila dhyana as we're doing our when we're doing our japa? And second thing, how can we also integrate emotions into this? Is it possible to bring in emotions into this so that it becomes more lively and real?
Yeah, the first very important point is that everyone has different instructions from their own guru, those who take initiation. These are the things to be followed mostly. I don't think that this would be something that any guru would say, no, never do this. But this may not be something for everybody. But for those who like it and they feel that this is in keeping with what they've been, told to do, then the emotional part should be there. This is how we develop emotion. If we picture Sri Ramakrishna talking to Narendra and telling him, think of that one incident when Narendra is scolding him. He said, Thakur, what is this? You're asking people to help me get a job and give me money. It's embarrassing to me and everything. How could you do that? And Thakur says to him, oh my Loren, Don't you know, for your sake, I would beg from door to door. We meditate on that incident. We do that. How can love not grow? How can we not feel some emotion over that? What was the first part of your question?
That's it. You answered the question, Marge.
Oh, okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Now
Now,
the other thing is that I find, or two other things. One is that we don't have to. We can incorporate this in a limited fashion, and by that I mean we can do our regular types of meditation, but also rather than feel that Thakur is sitting on a lotus, that we're still picturing him in his room, and we're sitting in the room with him. And where is that room? It's in the heart center. It's in the heart center. We're entering into that heart center and sitting face to face with Ramakrishna. Now, the other thing that we may find that uh, through the mind wandering about, it may reach that point where we say, okay, Thakur, I've seen you sing and dance enough. You've been talking your head off. Now go sit down and meditate. And I just want to watch you meditate. So we're letting the mind run around till it gets tired, like, the dog on the leash. Let it run around. Pull it back every once in a while. Otherwise, let it get tired out, and it'll sit down on its own. And then we can simply have a regular type of meditation. We're sitting face to face. We see Thakur. We feel that it's all the play taking place within the heart center, which means within the depths of our consciousness. That way. So it can be. We can read something first. Read a few pages from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I find reading, for me, this is one of the very helpful things. This has been my habit for the past, God, I don't want to say how many years, almost 50 years, to do some spiritual reading first, before meditation. Then if the mind wanders, it'll wander towards that. So these things are very helpful. Swamiji talked about, again, these are psychological things. If we meditate the same time every day, mind goes into a mood. The same place every day, we keep the same type of routine, the mind gets into a mood. These are all very helpful things. Swami Swahanandaji, he said many, many times, and it's one of my favorite expressions, that he would say, bind yourself to a routine. Now, it sounds the opposite of, spiritual life. We don't want to bind ourselves. We want to be free. But this is a type of freedom that we get when we don't have to wake up every morning and decide, oh, should I do it? Should I not do it? It becomes natural to us. It becomes so important to us that we can't wait to do it. We look forward to it. This whole idea of dhyana, of lila dhyana, it's such a beautiful idea, because as soon as our meditation is over, we feel that, okay, Thakur, I'm taking my leave. You wait, I'll come back tonight. I'll be with you. We remember all through the day. We remember, just as when they left. As soon as they left Thakur's room, they all thought, counting the seconds till I can see him again. So we tell Thakur, wait, Abarashbo, I'll come again. And then the whole day we're thinking, when can I go and sit at his feet again and listen to his nectar-like words and have the company of all the devotees? So that longing comes. This in the Vaishnava tradition, this is called two type of bhava. One is called viraha bhava, the other is milana bhava. Viraha bhava was when Radha couldn't see Sri Krishna. She was stuck at home. And this is considered by many of the Vaishnava teachers to be a higher state, because it's a state of longing, constantly thinking, when will I be with Krishna? When will I be with him? And when she goes and actually sees him, this is called milana bhava, that state of union, great joy and everything. But so we can feel that way, that when we sit for meditation, we're actually going and we're having that milana, we're having that union. We're really sitting in his presence, sitting at his feet, and afterwards, counting the seconds, remembering, and the whole mind is thinking, So this way, we look forward to our meditation. It's not a chore. Oh, I have to get up early. I have to do it. We'll get up early. We'll maybe take a shower first. We're going to see Thakur, and this is why Sri Ramakrishna emphasized so much the attitude of Radha. And not that he wanted people to become Vaishnavas and to worship Krishna and everything. He used to tell the Brahmos, very nice thing. He would tell them, look, I know you don't like this Radha Krishna business. You maybe don't even believe in Radha and Krishna, but try to see that tremendous longing that Radha had to be in the company of Krishna, and try to adopt that feeling. Try to superimpose this aropa. We had that idea. Try to feel the way she felt. So it's this idea that we can actually feel we're in the presence of God, and when we're not, then this parama vyakulata from the Bhakti Narada Bhakti Sutras. This is that intense yearning and longing and anguish of heart. What type of anguish of heart? Thakur, he gave such beautiful illustrations. You take gamcha, gamcha, these little, it looks like a big rag. It's just a very light cotton cloth, but in India they use it for everything. You put it around your waist, you go and bathe in the pond, you take it off, you dry yourself, you put it over your shoulder, you can carry vegetables, all sorts of things. But after you bathe, you'll rinse it out, you'll wash it, and you'll wring it out. You get all the water out, and it dries in 2 seconds. India is very hot. You wring it out. He said the longing for God was so intense. I felt as if someone were wringing my heart, as if it's a wet gamcha. Now imagine. So this vyakulata is intense anguish of heart for that vision of God and for that union with God. So if we can incorporate these things in whatever spiritual mood we have, just think of the small child. You've all seen this, I'm sure, that maybe the shopping with his mother at the mall, and wanders away and gets lost and can't find his mother. And he'll be screaming and yelling and oh, tears coming out of the eyes. Where's mommy? Where is mommy? Yeah, that type of longing for God realization. Thakur said, if we can have that, we can realize God. And this is that final stage. So this Lila Dhyana really does increase that emotional connection, the emotional element of meditation, which is so important and so helpful. Because meditation is not a question of mind, it's a question of heart. It's a question of feeling. We're really trying to get the mind to shut up. We're trying to get the mind to just step aside and let us feel that divine presence within. And if we do it in this very personal way, and Sri Ramakrishna always said that to meditate on the divine incarnation is the same as to meditate on God. However we understand it, whether we accept Sri Ramakrishna as an avatar or just as a perfect God realized soul, great ecstatic mystic, doesn't matter. To meditate on him, we get the same benefit. More, if we meditate on God, then which just strictly our imagination, very limited type of imagination. This is something very concrete and very tangible. So it does bring a very highly emotional element to our meditation and to our spiritual life.
Thank you, Maharaj. We have a lot of questions, so
Okay.
I'm going to ask Vikram if you can just introduce yourself when you're called and tell us where you're calling from, and also get very specific with your questions so we can get through as many questions as possible.
The first question is from Mohanty, who's joining us from Cypress, Texas.
Hi, this is Mohanty. Actually, I heard from Swamiji talking about the question, what I asked for. I like the idea of how the radius going, so the wandering mind will be, we can put in the radius. And the second one, I like the routine. But when I do with the kids age 12 or below 18, it's a little bit kind of hard. I also heard a talk from another Swami that a person can absorb 126 bits per second. But for example, my son looks like 3 tasks he does all correctly. I don't understand how he does, but such a excellent kid, but his mind always goes many different ways than he's silly thing, he does the wrong thing. So I don't know how to motivate or how to do such kids to one center certain task supposed to be one task only instead of multitask. So if you have a little bit, you said that already the kids is a little hard to tell or something because they're like that. Maybe just explain a little bit of what kind of books I can follow so I can learn a little bit better so I can guide the kids.
I always feel that the best way to impress anything on children is to do it ourselves. That we have to be an example, that they'll learn more by seeing us do it. That if we want children to develop some type of spiritual leaning and appreciation and everything, then in the family, in the house, there should be a shrine. And everyone should go there together. If the children see the parents meditating, they may not know what meditation is or anything like that, but if they can just sit quietly for 15 minutes while the parents are meditating, something like that, this is very helpful. Kids will not be impressed by anything that we tell them, but if they see that we put it into practice in our own lives, and this is something important to us and something beneficial to us, and that after that period they see a little calmness there and everything, then I think that leaves a deeper impression.
Vikram, you can get to the next question, and please, we request that we can see your video. So when you're asking a question, we need to see your video because it's much easier to understand what you're saying if we can read your face.
The next question is from Garrick, who's joining us from Toronto.
Pranam Maharaj, thank you for the great talk. I had two questions essentially. The first one being, what should be our attitude when we go for our regular prayers? Like we tend to focus a lot more on how we are enunciating and whatnot, but what's the ideal attitude to have? And the next question is that all the negative thoughts that we have, let's say, for example, anger, which sort of bubbles up in our mind during meditation. And in places we see in scriptures it being referred that we turn it towards God, but it feels a little bit weird. If you can sort of explain what is meant by that process. Thank you.
The first prayer, if we're talking about, say, reciting hymns and things like that, then the most important thing is what is the attitude that we have. There's a very nice verse from the Vishnu Purana that says, if I can remember it correctly, Murko vadadi Vishnaya, Dhiro vadadi Vishnave, Ubhayastu phalam samam punyam bhavagrahi janardana. Everyone knows the last line. Bhavagrahi janardana. The intelligent person who knows Sanskrit knows that you have to say Vishnave. This is the correct form. That salutations to Vishnu. Somebody who doesn't know anything, he hears Namah Shivaya, I can say Namah Vishnaya, Vishnavaya, something like that. It's incorrect. But it says that God doesn't care. Bhavagrahi, that he only accepts the love in your heart. And Thakur says the same thing. The small child can't pronounce Baba, can say Ba or Pa. Does he not know he's being called? So of course, it's better to pronounce things correctly. We don't, but it's really the attitude of our heart. It's what we're feeling. There should be some emotion behind it, some feeling of devotion, doing it as an offering, the glorification of the Lord, whatever. That'll be the most important thing.
And Swami, there's just to add to that question. There's a question here that says, can you explain then how lust is demonized? How lust?
Okay. Well, so the other question about anger. I'm sorry.
Turning with anger, lust.
Okay. Okay. I have actually something here that I can read because Swami Turiyananda asked that question once, and Thakur said, Let's see. Oh, okay. All right. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he did a very interesting thing. No matter how direct the realization of something he had, no matter how much he made his teaching his very own, he always gave credit to somebody else. Oh, I heard this from a wandering sadhu. This person said that Swami Tarayanga Swami, he said 20 after 21 days. This person said that. So he gives credit to somebody named Girendra Ghosh of Partorya Gata. We have no idea who he was, but we find it in the Narada Bhakti Sutra also. He says, as Girendra Ghosh of Partorya Gata once remarked, since you cannot get rid of your passions, your lust, your anger, and so on, give them a new direction. Instead of desiring worldly pleasure, desire God, sport with Brahman. If you cannot get rid of anger, then change its direction. Assume the tamasic attitude of bhakti and say, what? I have repeated the hallowed name of Durga, and shall I not be liberated? How can I be a sinner anymore? How can I be bound anymore? If you cannot get rid of temptation directed toward God, be infatuated with God's beauty. If you cannot get rid of pride, then be proud to say that you are the servant of God, you are the child of God. Thus turn the 6 passions toward God. Okay, now I will make a confession that I don't think this always works. And if we have anger, sometimes we have to really, what is the root of that anger? And we have to analyze it. And is it helpful to me? And generally, if we analyze these things, we find that it goes back to this ego sense that we have. Sometimes we simply have to say that, look, you did something to me and I got angry. That means I suffered twice, once by what you did and once by what I did. Because I'm the one that I got angry. I'm the one who, I don't have to get angry. You said something to me and I got insulted. No, I don't have to get insulted. There's some people in this world that you can't insult them. You can say all sorts of things to them and they'll laugh. And they say, you're right. I'm not very smart. Yeah, look at me. I'm not very good looking. This and that. And they'll laugh. They can't be insulted. You have to participate in that process. They can't get angry. So we have to analyze these things. So this other technique, it may work in some instances and for some people and everything. Otherwise, there are other techniques that we use, especially this anger, that we have to say, who is it that's getting angry? Another nice technique with anger, I find, is when we, if we analyze and say that I'm not angry, there's an anger vritti that has arisen in the chitta. That's all. That this anger vritti has arisen in the chitta. I'm not angry. I have to experience that. And it doesn't have to arise. I can have some control and some say over that. We always assume that there's something called righteous anger or justifiable anger, things like that. But there's nothing justifiable or righteous about it. If we realize that we're the ones who are suffering, we sometimes think that we get angry at the other person, that we're getting back at them. No, if they want to make us angry, they're probably happy. I succeeded. I got him to lose his temper. So if we really analyze and see that I'm not hurting anybody but myself, there's no advantage to it. This is one way to deal with things like that. This other thing like desires, there we can really see that this desire that I have for external things is a desire to fulfill some need that I have that's really misunderstood longing for some ultimate type of fulfillment which can only be fulfilled with the realization or with God or some higher type of experience. There with something like desires, I think it really does work. It may not work with everything, but we have all these different techniques because we have to have different weapons to fight all these different enemies that assail us. Shadaripu, these 6 enemies, and there are more than 6, but we talk about 6 like that.
Thank you, Swamiji. Vikram, next question.
The next question is from Robert, who's joining us from Mesa in Arizona.
Swamiji, thank you very, very much. I'm a retired Anglican priest. My accent's Australian. I find what you're saying resonates more than anything else I've ever heard in terms of Advaita Vedanta. And it's because of my obvious Christian devotional background. You're talking about the psychology of devotion, the psychology of relationship, and this idea of transcendence, that idea that God is altogether other, but then you've got this immanent reality and this idea of intimacy and immanence. So I find myself completely resonating with what you're saying. Thank you very, very much. Question I've got is much more pedestrian. You mentioned the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, and you gave 3 sections. I'm taking notes not only for myself, but for a class that I'm facilitating. What were the 3 sections? Could you just in very summary form outline them, please?
Yeah. The first section deals with the question that Arjuna asked Sri Krishna, and it'll be the first, 6 verses, something like that, about which is the better path and why. And so Sri Krishna is saying that path of devotion is a little better, the other is more difficult, and he gives some reasons. Then the second section will begin when he talks about fix your mind on God, and it'll go until that end of that one verse that says that the highest of all of these will be Tyaga, this renunciation. From renunciation, peace immediately follows. Then the third section, he'll start giving a description of who do I consider to be the best type of devotee. So that'll be the illustrative portion, you could say, of that chapter.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. What part of Australia were you from?
Well, way back, Brisbane, Australia. I met my wife in Alice Springs, Australia.
Okay, I was recently there, and we have a brand new center in Brisbane. A beautiful property. Yeah, very, very nice. Yeah.
Beautiful weather.
Yeah.
Thank you. Vikram, next question.
The next question is from Bindu, who's joining us from Laguna Niguel, I believe. Bindu?
Pranam Swami, how are you?
Oh, how are you? Nice to see you. Another nice, friendly, familiar face. Yeah. Okay.
I had a question. If one has a tendency towards Gyan Yoga, and of course, as Swami Vivekananda says, we have, as a sadhaka, we do all the 4 yogas in our practice. How does one incorporate bhakti within the Gyan Yoga? I've heard of the term Advaita Bhakti, but it's not very clear in my mind that if one is, mainly or has a tendency towards Gyan Yoga, how do you incorporate bhakti?
Okay. I'm very glad you asked this question, because this was one of the big points that I wanted to get to that I missed or forgot or just, yeah. Okay, now, generally, and this is, of course, oversimplification, but generally, the path of devotion is associated with the dualistic schools, either the Dvaitavada or Vishishta Dvaitavada. So especially South India, Ramanuja and Madhva, these would be the main devotional schools. And Dvaita Vedanta can have a devotional side, but generally this is more for the hardcore jnanis, those who they'll engage in this vichara, self-inquiry, and spend their time in meditation. Now, Sri Ramakrishna's Bhakti Yoga, if we want to say that Sri Ramakrishna has his own Bhakti Yoga, is a little bit different, because he is presenting us with a dualistic type of sadhana superimposed on the truth of oneness. And he gives us many, many illustrations. So he's also a brilliant psychologist. So he'll make statements like, as long as we have this feeling of I, there will be truth. As long as we have this feeling of the ego sense, as long as we think of ourselves as a person, we'll think of God as a person. So these are very subtle remarks. That means when the ego dies, we'll think differently. So he says that this stick of ego is lying on the surface of the water. It gives the impression that there are 2 sides. We're in one side, God is on the other. Other living beings will be on the other side. But This stick on the surface of the water has no power to separate one side from the other. It's just on the surface. It's an apparent type of separation. So what he's saying is that we accept the relative reality of dualism. That means that the sense of I, this sense of I, which is really separating me from God, I accept that. This is real from the Vyavaharika point of view, from the relative point of view, that it has a certain type of reality, and a very strong type of reality, because we can very rarely get rid of this sense of I, self-identification. So we utilize this in order to transcend it. This is again this idea of Vidyamaya and Avidyamaya. So the path of devotion that Ramakrishna is talking about is meant, it starts out with a certain type of dualism, that God is there and I'm there, and he's separate, and yet I want to have some type of union with God. So through these devotional types of practices, this ego sense, which is separating us, this ego gets dissipated. And Swamiji says in one place that all spiritual practice is meant to get rid of this ego sense. So it doesn't get eliminated by thinking about it. The problem with the path of Jnana Yoga, I'm always thinking about myself. Who am I? That we're trying to get rid of the ego, we may be reinforcing it. But if the whole mind is on the other person, if the whole mind is thinking of God, then I become self-forgetful. Then automatically I'm transcending this dualistic plane. So through this path of devotion, we realize that oneness. So his idea is that we're superimposing we're putting a face on God and giving a name to God, that infinite absolute reality, like the water. Even when we give a name to it, even it's nameless. Even when we put it in a container, it's still formless. So it gives other beautiful examples that in the ocean, there are places where it becomes very cold and the water can form blocks of ice. Now we can give a name to that, and it already has a form. So this allows us to have a relationship and to worship it. But he said the sun of knowledge comes up and it'll melt back into water. And even when it has name and form, it's nothing but water. Okay? So he's really, through this path of devotion, he's really harmonizing the three different schools of Vedanta: the dualist, qualified non-dualist, and the non-dualist. And as we proceed in this path of devotion, this is what I was saying earlier, like this cord getting us closer. First, we get to the beloved is separate from us. Then we go a little closer, and we reach that state of union. We go even higher, and we completely forget ourselves. We become one. Swami Vivekananda tells this beautiful Sufi story that the lover goes to the house of the beloved and knocks on the door, and she says, "Who is it?" And he says, it is I. And she won't open the door. She asks the second time, "It is I." He doesn't open it. That's the third time, and he says, "It is your very self." And then she opens the door. So through the path of devotion, Thakur says, we also reach that state of oneness. And the dualism that we start with is not a fixed position. This is for the sake of spiritual practice. We're using name and form for the sake of easy access to be able to fix the mind, to be able to utilize our emotions. But it's all resting on the ocean of infinite absolute consciousness. We're a little wave, God is a huge wave. God is also the ocean, we're also the ocean.
Thank you, Swamiji. We have another question that's come in. Question is it appropriate to experiment with different bhavas to discover what works best? Or does one's ishta define what bhava to adopt? For example, would a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna by default assume the attitude of a child to a father, servant, or master? Please explain.
Okay. We had one Swami, Swami Paramahansanandaji. He was a disciple of a Holy Mother. He's famous for all of the beautiful letters and songs, poems that he wrote. They've all been published and translated and everything. He was very fond of this idea of looking upon Sri Ramakrishna as a boy. Huh? So, or even this play of Sri Ramakrishna with his friends, his boyhood friends, his Satyabhava, that way. There are all different attitudes that we can take, even with Sri Ramakrishna. Swami Vivekananda, what was his attitude towards Thakur? There was an incident once where, you know, Baranagur, it was either there or, I don't remember, or one of the early monasteries. The daily worship was done of Sri Ramakrishna. One day Swamiji said, I'll do it today. I'll do the food offering today. And traditional in India that at the time of the food offering, other people leave and the curtain may be drawn, so Thakur can eat in quiet and peace and everything. But they heard from the outside, they heard Swamiji calling Thakur, come my friend. Huh? Now, which one of us can have that relationship with Thakur as a friend to a friend, as an equal to an equal? Only Swamiji. And of course, that was probably, you know, an unusual thing for him. Mahapurush Maharaj, Swami Shivananda, what was his attitude towards Sri Ramakrishna? Anybody know? Mother. He would even call her Ma sometimes. He had lost his mother when he was young. He looked upon Thakur as a mother. These are all possible attitudes that we can have even with Sri Ramakrishna. We may love to think of him as a small child. This is actually the genius of the Vaishnava tradition, because they worship Sri Krishna in all different stages of his life, in different ages. So if those will worship him as with this Vatsalya Bhava, they'll think of him as the baby Gopal. And then Sakya Bhava and the Madhur Bhava, they'll think of him as Govinda. Huh? And then Dasya Bhava, it can be that Arjuna, looking at him as the charioteer. So there are all different ways. There's no limit. There's no limit to the use of the imagination. One of the letters of Swami Paramahansananda, he's writing, I don't remember who he's writing to. He said that I just learned of a new game. It's called table tennis. You stand on one side, the other person is the other side, and you hit a ball and he hits it back and everything. Just try to picture yourself playing tennis with Sri Ramakrishna. What joy you'll have with that. So there's no limit to the use of the imagination that way. The only little footnote that I would give is that any question about anything like this, those who are initiated, check with the guru if possible. They may say that no, this mood is not especially good for you. The Madhur Bhava is the one that is the most dangerous, we can say, and this is the one that is the most misused in India and many of the different traditions during Thakur's day, the Ghosh Para and Karta Bhaja. There were different groups like that where they would try to reenact this play, and they each man would be Krishna and have his Radha and everything, and they made a mess of everything. So we have to be a little cautious sometimes, but otherwise, just in a very innocent way, we can think of Thakur as a small child. We can think of him because he himself used to say he had different moods. This Balakavat, as a boy, the God-realized soul, this is one of the descriptions that we have. He used to say that sometimes a small boy, sometimes a teenager, sometimes in his youth, sometimes giving teachings to others, sometimes just as a small child calling for its mother. So there's no limit to the use of the imagination that way. But again, tempered a little bit by, you know, our common sense and the instructions that we get in spiritual life from our guru or from any senior spiritual teacher that we have.
Thank you, Swamiji. Next question, Vikram.
The next question is from Rita, who I believe is joining us from Athens, Georgia.
Hi, Rita.
Thank you so much, Vikram and Swami Harinamananji and Swami. Your talk is just amazing. Your answers are very, very beautiful. You know, we live in an age when our senses are so powerful. Everything is the marketing age, the advertising, everything. So I like to sing, but then sometimes I get carried away with the music itself. But I want to use it as a prayer. But how to find that balance? Because when you're meditating, you're supposed to cut loose the senses, still the mind, go within. But then with music, you're supposed to bring it out to get that balance.
Mm-hmm. Meditation is the one spiritual practice that we all assume is the best. And if it's done properly, it's the one with the most intensity. But for most people, it's also the most difficult and the one that we're least successful at. So for some people, if the mind, we sit for meditation, the mind is constantly wandering, is it not better to stop and sing? Or even to read, or to do japa, or prayer? Actually, whenever Thakur is asked about what are the main, what is it, he said, upai. He used that was the question, what are the means by which to realize God? Generally, he would start with a holy company, number one, and then solitude, number two. But very often he would go to prayer before meditation. Prayer is much easier because we don't have to still the mind. We can use words, we can use our emotions and everything. Not that we should easily give up and say, oh, meditation is too hard. We have to try. There's some benefit even to meditation where the mind is wandering and we're struggling. We don't want to give that up. But we shouldn't think that spiritual practice like singing bhajans or anything like that, or prayer and it's a little ritualistic puja, we shouldn't think that any of that is less effective. And if that brings out that love in our hearts, then it's tremendously advantageous to us.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah.
Next question, Vikram.
The next question is from Pepe.
Hi.
Hello, hi Pepe.
Hi, I'm Swamiji.
Where are you calling?
I'm calling from Guadalajara, Mexico.
Oh, wonderful.
Pranam.
Okay.
Swamiji, my question goes in this way: for jnana yoga or bhakti yoga, the measurement in daily life for me is it's to be fearless or to be happy. That's how I try to measure. We try to measure things, right? And being fearless or being happy is the easiest way and the most connected with Vedanta that I've found. If I'm struggling, then I'm struggling both in life and in Vedanta. So what I try to hear is the connection between Bhakti and the concept of abhayam, of fearlessness.
Yes.
And how can we conciliate these two? There's fears when there's two, and there's two in Bhakti. So can you elaborate on that?
Okay, this is a very nice idea we find in Jnana Yoga. Where there are two, there's fear. That where there's not another, if we can feel our oneness with everyone, then who is there to fear? So it's a very nice idea in Bhakti, in Jnana Yoga. In Bhakti Yoga, we can also feel our oneness with others. Separation but oneness. We can feel we're all children of the Divine Mother. We have that in common. We don't have to just say, oh, I only see the self in all beings. We can all feel that we partake in that divinity. But one specific thing I would mention, though, is that this special attitude of the servant to the master. This is the greatest for this idea of fearlessness. That, as I said before, like the bodyguard for the president doesn't mind taking a bullet even for the president. It'll be glory. It'll be proud to do it. So if we really feel that my whole life is only for serving God, it's like a Hanuman for Rama. What could he possibly fear? And then we have this other idea, I'm a child of the Divine Mother, what is there to fear? And I know that no matter what happens, that Mother will look after me. And what if I lose my life? I'm the eternal child of the Divine Mother. So all these different attitudes can also help with this idea of fearlessness. Now, there are other measures by which we can judge spiritual progress. And we really shouldn't be obsessed with this idea of spiritual progress. We should take the attitude, I'll do whatever I can, and then I'll leave everything up to God. But the degree of forbearance, of patience, of kindness, of compassion, of love, feeling of oneness with others, all of these things should grow if we're really developing our spiritual life in a very positive way. We should really grow in love and compassion. It's a very important thing. And we should not care so much about ourselves. This Swamiji's his main criterion for everything really was selflessness. That this is the real key. This is how we know that we've made some progress in spiritual life. The less we care about ourselves, the more we care about others. Is one of the statements he made is my favorite. The beautiful statement is, they alone live who live for others, the rest are more dead than alive. So this selflessness, this compassion, this love, patience, forbearance, fearlessness, for sure, all of these are signs that we're making some progress in spiritual life.
Thank you, Swamiji. Can we get our next question, Vikram?
The next question is from Durjoy, who's joining us from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Hi, Durjoy.
Hi, Swamiji. How are you? Pranam.
Okay.
So my question is, you have been talking about Sharanagati, which we know is a very, very important component of Bhakti Bhava, Bhakti Yoga. We know that Thakur is there, Ma is there when we need to completely surrender ourselves. In spite of knowing that, when we are at times surrounded by difficulties, we get baffled. I speak about myself. I don't know about others. Why is it so? If we do practice Bhakti Yoga and we know that we have a mother, we have Thakur, and we need to resort to refuge, complete surrender to God, then why do we get baffled, and what should we do to increase this feeling of Sharanagati so that there is not even 1% gap in between our feeling, our refuge towards Thakur and Ma?
This perfect Sharanagati is a very rare thing. This will come through grace, or will come through some type of God realization. We're all striving for these things. These are all ideals. There may be times when we lose our faith. There may be times when we think, no, I have to do this myself. And Sharanagati also doesn't mean that we don't use self-effort, that we do our best. Sharanagati means that we accept whatever comes. We accept the results of it. How to increase it? This is what I was saying. We have no way of increasing any of these very high things except through constant and steady spiritual practice, sadhana. Thakur gives so much emphasis, as much as he says that we have to have this spontaneous love of God, anuraga. These are the very high things. They'll say, but we don't get anything unless we have tremendous determination and grit, stick with our spiritual practice day in and day out, no matter how tedious it may seem, no matter what, we'll get the fruits of it. Then two other things that he always recommends that are much easier. One is holy company, because in holy company we see the fruits of all of these things. Unless we see the simple joy and contentment that comes from someone who has perfectly practiced this complete surrender to the will of God. Unless we really see that, then where's the incentive for it? We think, oh, it sounds nice, but really, is it something that's so wonderful? If we see it, then we really understand it, and the heart yearns for it. Second thing is solitude. He talks about this solitude so much that we can intensify our spiritual life in solitude. For most of us, It's not possible to really just leave the home and go to some distant place and everything. But the more time we spend, solitude can even kone bone mone. It can be in the corner of your house, can be the solitude, huh? Right? Or if not, just within the heart center, that way. So I would say these few things, that if there's a holy company is very helpful, solitude is very helpful, and we have to analyze also what is it in life that we ultimately have to have anxiety over. This life will end one day. This body will fall apart one day. Do we really want to spend our whole life with anxiety over little problems that come up, over health and all of these things? So we have to analyze a little bit also. And we also have to utilize all of our effort. Real Sharanagati doesn't come until we've flown in every direction and haven't found land. Huh? We have to do that. And then finally we say, okay, this is not humanly possible to do anything more than I've done. I take shelter, I take refuge. But at the same time, this Sharanagati is also a type of spiritual practice. You remember with Girish Ghosh, huh? how Thakur, he said, okay, then give me your power of attorney. That man that every second we have to ask, is this ego sticking up again? It's making me do all of this and I'm pretending I'm ego devotee? Or am I really doing what I think is the will of God? Am I really acting out of selflessness? Am I really acting as an offering to God? To constantly ask ourselves all of these things. So they're little tricks, but we shouldn't set the bar too high. That really perfect Sharanagati, this is a very rare thing, just like these very high states of devotion. But our advantage is that, we're small containers, Adha. It's easier to fill it up. Huh? So we can be filled with God more easily than someone says, Swami Vivekananda, huge container. Huh? He could withstand so much. So even a little bit of Sharanagati will bring great joy and peace in our lives.
Swami, your time's almost coming up, but let's ask two more questions. I'm going to ask you one question, how Vikram picked last live question. Question here is, when choosing an ideal form of God to worship, what if your ideal form is a formless but personal God, like the Jewish God? Sometimes I have a hard time because in the Vedanta community, everyone is focused more on a physical ideal form of God. But this is not how I connect with God.
This is absolutely 100% legitimate. And there are schools in India like that. Actually, the Brahmo Samaj was formed with that idea in mind, that they very much objected to what they called as image worship. Now, worshiping God with form doesn't have to mean with an image. This is another interesting point. When we read in the gospel about God having form, it's not always clear what the question means. For some, the Brahmos, they meant, should we worship God in an image? It doesn't have to mean that. This form of God, if we look at the old Purusha Suktam and this idea of Virat and everything, the whole universe is the body of God. We can have that type of idea. Or we can say that just as I'm really not his body, God is also not the body. So we can, and this is the dominant idea in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that there's no form. And even when we say form, it's not a physical form. There's no form. The form is really part of our superimposition, our projection and everything. There's no physical form really, unless we take this universe. But we can easily think that God is the repository of all divine qualities, love and compassion and kindness, justice, and all of these things. So it's very legitimate thing. The difficulty is if our meditation involves some type of visualization, how to do it. And this is really the justification for all of the different iconographic forms of God we find in Hinduism. Swamiji says it in one place. Why do we have so many hundreds and thousands of gods and goddesses? is for the sake of the mind, so that the mind can have something tangible to fix itself on. Now, there are types of meditation where one simply thinks of the vast ocean, or Thakur says, feel that you're a fish swimming in the water, or a bird released from the cage, to have that type of meditation. So there are all different types. So that definitely can be done. The advantage is that we feel ourselves in that realm of the absolute. Disadvantage is that the mind can wander a little bit because there's nothing quite so tangible for the mind to cling to.
Thank you, Swamiji. Let's have one last live question.
The next question is from Sam, who's joining us from Dublin. I don't think it's the one in Ireland.
He can tell us.
Sam, you're up.
Pranam Maharaj, this is Dublin, California, near
Okay.
And it's a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. And thank Swami Harinamanandaji to arrange this course. My question is simple. It's about Gyan Mishra Bhakti that we talk about in Kathamrita mostly. It's a Bhakti, but lots of Jnana mixed with it. Now, about Shankaracharya, who is the ultimate Advaita Vedantist. At the end of his life, he wrote Bhajagavindam and Aigiri Nandini and all those hymns. So did he become a bhakta at the end, or just, this is a, can you give us, elaborate that Jnanamishra Bhakti about,
Okay. First of all, Bhajagavindam, don't be fooled by the title. Is a hymn 100% on renunciation. Just full of the strongest type of renunciation. But he did write other hymns in praise of gods and goddesses. Whether he did it earlier or later, it's also hard to say. I think his personality was a little multifaceted. That they say he had different types of writings. Some is called Vada. Vada is arguments, where he has to prove, defeat other schools and everything. This will be his commentaries. Then there's some Upadesha. These are his Vivekachudamani and other things, instructions. And then the stutis and stuff is the hymns and things. So he was responsible for really reestablishing temple worship in India also. So he must have had some devotional side to him also. But of course, the Jnani side was predominant in him. With Sri Ramakrishna, they were perfectly balanced. They weren't two different things. He didn't have to harmonize two discordant notes. For him, there was no contradiction whatsoever, because it was all a mental attitude. Now, I'll mention the line from one song that he was very fond of. To me, it's very, very important. There's a song of Ram Prasad where he says, Ami chini hote chai na ma, ami chini khete bhalobashi. He says, I don't want to become sugar, I want to taste sugar. Now, this is a way of saying that whether I take the attitude of dualistic attitude, a little separation, so I can enjoy that relationship, I can enjoy the flavor, the taste of it, or whether I become one with it, is not a philosophical question. See, the dualists will say, well, don't even say that. It's not possible to become sugar. You'll never become sugar. He's saying that, yes, I know the mind can merge in Brahman. I'll be one with Brahman. I come down a little bit, little sense of I is there. That sense of I will allow me to enjoy this relationship, lover and beloved. So Sri Ramakrishna, for him, both were real. And for him, it was not philosophy. For him, it was direct experience. So he used to say, sometimes when I look within, I see that two are there. Mother is there and her child. Sometimes I look within, I see mother alone is there. Huh? So it depends just on how high the mind goes. Mind will go a little bit higher and there's no one to look. There's nothing, only merged in Brahman. So that was a bhavamukha state. He could go back and forth between these three moods. He comes down, he feels himself back in this physical body, but seeing everything as a manifestation of the divine, goes a little bit higher, and he's feeling that divine relationship a little bit higher. He's lost. Then the Brahman alone exists. there. So for him, it wasn't reconciling different philosophical systems. It was depending on the depth of his experience at that time, how high the mind went, what rung of the ladder he was on at the time, but all within the same scale of reality, all of it real.
Thank you, Swamiji. And thank you, everyone, for this enjoyable experience. And Swamiji, thank you for taking on this one with Bhakti and Bhakti Yoga.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Practices. Wait 1 second, Marge.
Yeah.
So we will I'm going to have you do a closing chant. But I want to give a continuation. Another form of practice that we do is also going on pilgrimage. So next week, we're going to have Swami Chidakananda speak about sacred travel and inner transformation. In other words, how many of us, if I were to say a show of hands, how many of us go on pilgrimage? And where do we go? And how many of us actually, what does pilgrimage become? Does it become a sightseeing place where you gather information? In Swami's talk, he's going to talk about how we can make pilgrimage, instead of information, collecting information, a sense of transformation. How can we see the living Kailas? How can we go to Amnath and see the living Amnath? So through the words and actions of Sri Ramakrishna, we're going to know how to transform our mind so we can use the mind of a pilgrim. Pilgrim actually means per azure, to see beyond what one normally sees. So he's going to give us insights into the pilgrim mindset. And there's an article, a series of articles that was written by him. So we've actually, Vikram, have we sent it out? Do we have it on the website? Okay. We will send it out. Oh, we have it on the website. Okay. So if you go to the San Diego Vedanta.org website, you'll find an article on the pilgrimage, the pilgrimage mindset, how to have the pilgrim mindset. So come back next week. That'll be on Wednesday. And thereafter, we have a couple other talks. The last talk is not listed on our agenda. We're going to have all the panelists that can come, which will be June 6th. No, it'll be the week, June 17th, I believe, or June 10th.
10th.
June 10th, right?
Yes, 10th.
And we can further our Q&A session at that time. And so all the questions that weren't asked or questions that you didn't have a chance, you can have a chance to ask to the panelist, Swami Atmajnanananda. Will you be available June 10th?
I guess so. I don't know.
I'll ask you later. Sarva Prima is going to be there. Rupananda, Vrajaprana, they're all going to be there. And it'll just be a 2-hour session on questions and answers. I'll talk to Swamiji later and see if he's available as well. Okay. So I thank everyone again for coming today and making this a wonderful gathering, which we all learn from each other. And I'd like to request Swami Atmajnanananda to give a closing chant. And one last thing is, all of these are being recorded, and all the sessions are recorded. We will have them up, all the sessions up by the last, by June 10th. We're going to try to have them all as a series that you can watch all together on the website. So if you missed anything, hopefully by June 10th, you'll be able to see everything. Swami, please help us close off the chant.
Om sarve bhavantu sukhina sarve santu niramaya sarve bhadrani pashyantu ma kaschit dukhabhag bhavet. Om shanti shanti shanti. May all beings be happy. May all be free from disease. May all realize the highest good. May none suffer from misery. Om peace, peace, peace be unto all. And my thanks to Swamiji, my thanks to all of you. It was a very, very nice experience. I enjoyed it very much. I'm very happy to see some old faces that I haven't seen for a while. And yeah, I hope everyone stays well.
Swamiji, if you go to the speaker's view, there you can see everybody. And we'd like to just, if you can just wave to everybody, you can scroll on the right-hand side so you can make sure you can catch all the images there. All right, can you do that, Swamiji?
I think so.
Okay, so just scroll. On your right-hand side, you'll see there's a triangle.
Yeah, I see.
Okay, so you can see everybody from all over the world, and you can just say hi. Atlanta, you see.
Hi, Jyoti. Okay, yeah.
And you'll just say all over, Marge. So, I just wanted you to have a darshan everybody, and everybody has a chance to have your darshan.
Okay, thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. Thanks.
Jai Ma. Jai Ma.
Bye, Ma.